Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all new episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saveri.
On the program today, the mid-year review. Nick and we're a little bit on a semi-mini vacation here in July as the weather, gets a little bit warmer. But we wanted to leave you guys and gals out there with a look back so far at the first half of the year. It's been a crazy first half of the year. I can't believe 2024, that we're in 2024, but it's been such a crazy first half of the year. We're getting ready for the second half of the year. The political calendar is going to be off the charts. The RNC, the DNC, another debate. We've got the election in November. We've got so much stuff coming up, so many other different topics that are playing out, Supreme Court decisions like we just saw in our last episode. So there's so much out there to talk about. Nick, for you, I love when we do these sometimes because, it's always like you kind of look back and sometimes people may have missed different episodes, different interviews, different reactions that we had to guests, to topics, to things that they mentioned to us. But just for you, 2024, mid-year right now, as it's been on the show, what's been like some of the things that you've like, man, I can't believe we covered this. I can't believe this played out and we got to be a part of, talking about it and bringing on guests to speak about it. How's the year so far been playing out in Nick Saveri's head?
I think of 2024, from the standpoint of our show as being a year of even more relevancy. Year one for us was, we were just on a quest to learn, and we still are. But when we came into this year, we started to think about, what is most relevant to our listeners. And by happenstance, we ran into stories this year that kept coming up of like, this is going to directly affect us. And, full disclosure, everyone, before we got on the mic today, we started to talk about that, like what, really stood out here as far as, conversation. And the first one that came to me, was our discussion of Boeing. And one of the reasons I particularly like that conversation was, one of the things I love about the show is, there's so much that goes on, and Mike and I share constantly back and forth social media things, articles, whatnot. And you have an outlet here where we get to really come on, we've been informed, we get to talk to an informed person and have a really intelligent conversation. And we try to keep it light. So the Boeing situation comes up. And obviously, for those of you who've been paying attention, obviously there's been hearings, and you have one of the largest manufacturer of airplanes in the country basically not keeping their house in order. And for those of you who are, true crime buffs, we're having people dying within the company. All this is going on. And especially when we're talking about airplanes, many of us travel by flight. I more so this year than in previous years for my work, I'm regularly on an airplane. And you got to a point now where if you look up try to find out who manufactured the plane of your upcoming trip, that's a wild thing to think about, especially in 2024. So that was something that came out to me.
In a rush to address its bottlenecks in production, Boeing hit problems, pushing pieces together with excessive force to make them appear that the gaps don't exist, even though they exist. The gap didn't actually go away, and this may result in premature fatigue failure. Effectively, they are putting out defective airplanes. I repeatedly produced reports for my supervisors and Boeing management demonstrating that the gaps in the 787 not being properly measured or shimmed in two major joints of the 787. Evaluating from the 29 inspected airplane data, I found gaps exceeding the specification that were not properly addressed 98.7% of the time. I want to repeat that. 98.7% of the time, the gaps that they were supposed to be shimmed, they were not shimmed.
Well, thanks, Nick, because I got to get on a flight in a week or so. So thank you for that. And, it's funny. Well, not funny because, we just heard a little bit of that hearing that's happening on Capitol Hill. And it's one of the cool things about being on this show, because we're going to touch on it in a second, but being able to interview lawmakers that were a part of that hearing on Capitol Hill has been something that's really been cool for this show. And like you said, that's a topic that I don't think a lot of people have been paying attention to because you alluded to it. Boeing has had two former employees testify against them, and both of them are now dead, and for different reasons. One by suicide. I'm using air quotes because the medical examiner determined suicide, but it was like a single shot to the head. And the other one died of like a rapid infectious disease. These are things that, like, if you watch The Americans on FX, like these are the things that played out like in the 80s. And so, again, I don't want to drive, the conspiracy bus here, but when you hear something like that on Capitol Hill with former employees that were there saying, hey, Boeing was doing this and just trying to make deadlines so they could sell more of their equipment without the safety checks. Because I don't know if you know, but planes go up in the air, like they're not, even if they were on the roadway, like they're up in the air, like there's millions of dollars at stake, but there's also millions of people that travel by air daily. So millions of lives are on the line. And you're right. It was a fun story for us to cover. Speaking of stories, I loved while you were away recently traveling, we got to have, friend of the pod, Sabrina Rodriguez, on the show over at the Washington Post national politics reporter. She does such a great job covering a bunch of different topics. Obviously Washington Post been sending her to the debate recently to cover some, focus group with voters. And she's been really focused on voters this upcoming year because it's an election year. And she recently was on the show co-hosting. We were talking about the youth vote. We were talking about, voter issues, but she happened to go to a concert where in a swing state in Pennsylvania where you live, Nick, and voters were giving her, a little bit of like this, it's kind of like one of those books where you read where it's like, did Batman do this? Turn to page 18. If you think he did this, turn to page 25. And it's kind of like one of those funnel the conversation type ways. Let's see where they go. And she was asking these young voters, it's like, so you're a never Trumper, but you don't want to vote for Biden? So are you researching the other candidates? And everyone was like giving her these answers that all led everyone down the maze of one single answer. And I just thought it was so interesting because we do so much analyzing here of different voter blocks and all these different groups of people. And I just think that Sabrina does a great job encapsulating the way the youth vote specifically for her article is feeling, but the way voters, love to talk to reporters and explain stuff. And then once you get them to talk a little bit more, you realize that they need a little bit of guidance in understanding what direction they should go.
It really illustrated how strongly people have reservations about Joe Biden, that they couldn't bring themselves to say that they were voting for Joe Biden. Like, it was sort of like there's this hope that something's going to change. There's this hope that someone else will emerge. Like, still sort of this idea of like, I'll make this decision in November, but I'll never vote for Donald Trump. But I'll make this decision in November. And of dozens of people that I talked to, I mean, it was only a couple of people that the way I've said it to my friends and stuff was there was only a few people that could like say it with their chest that they were voting for Joe Biden. Other people that I met that ended up saying they were voting for him for re-election was sort of like we'd go down the rabbit hole of, oh, okay, you're undecided, but never Trump. Okay, so then are you exploring a third party candidate? Well, I don't want my vote to be wasted. Okay, well, if you don't want your vote to be wasted and you're never Trump, then are you going to vote for Joe Biden? Well, I guess. And I had a lot of those conversations. And I think it was I'm so glad I had that experience and I've had in other states and stuff, but getting to have those conversations, because that's really not what you get to see in polls. You see like the top lines of them, but to really like game out with people, like you're really not happy about the options that you have.
Quick break from our pod to tell you about a new pod at Fresh Roasted Coffee, Envy Pods. So if you go to freshroastedcoffee.com, my partner's shaking his head. That's a good transition. What are you kidding me?
It was good. No, I shook my head. I was like, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I saw this picture earlier. I was like, I saw what you're doing.
That's right. It is a fantastic transition, Nick, if I do say so myself. Listen, the new Envy Pods over at our partners at Fresh Roasted Coffee. These pods are environmentally safe. They are compostable. And let me tell you something. When you open these individually wrapped pods, Nick, they smell absolutely delicious. You can check out these new pods from our sponsors over at freshroastedcoffee.com and enter in the new promo code. Can we please get 20, all one word, and the number 20. Can we please get 20 for 20% off your purchase? Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling, this non-committal attitude that, and it's not necessarily because they're young voters. I mean, I'm 45 and I'm not voting for Trump. I am going to vote for Joe Biden, but not certainly excited about it. So I get it, but I'm very grateful to continue the analysis, because I know on this show a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I went through a few episodes where I was definitely wagging the finger at young people. And I'm glad to continue to have this, to learn from others and people in the field about, where young voters are. I mean, they made a huge difference in 2022. And the question now is, what will they do in 2024? Now, as I'm talking about young people, obviously it's hard for me to not think about one of the staples of the youth of America, which is social media. It's a huge influencer. We have many people that would put influencer down as their job or their desired job. And, one of the best conversations we had about TikTok involved a younger member of Congress. We were fortunate enough to have Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas come on and give her assessment of what's going on at the time with the discussion of TikTok in Congress, which of course is funny because you have a bunch of old people, talking about an application that they barely know how to use and what's going on with it. But the conversation of it, its impact with our relations with China, the threat of China, essentially what felt like another trumped up version of a yellow scare in 2024 was a conversation I was grateful we had.
So overall, I appreciated the spirit of the bill. I felt like execution is where we were failing a little bit. And so I couldn't be a yes or a no, because I don't want to send a signal as if TikTok is okay in the hands of the Chinese, because I don't believe that. I do have grave concerns about the CCP and their antics, not only when it comes to social media, but in a lot of conversations that I've had on a number of CODELs to other countries. I mean, these folk are like the mob, right? And I think that we got caught slipping before when it came down to social media. That's how we ended up with January 6th. That's how we ended up with the Russian disinformation. That's how we ended up in a problematic stance. The problem that I have is that Congress in and of itself is behind. And if we're going to do something, we need to do something that will stand the test of time as it relates to social media and AI. And so I didn't really like the idea that this was more singularly targeted at TikTok. I understand that we have the grave concerns around China. We have the grave concerns around the algorithms that are being pumped out. But to be perfectly honest, I feel a way about X right about now. And like to say, hey, you've got to sell your company. Well, who's to say that Elon won't be the one to buy it? Like, I mean, like there were so many issues that I had around the execution. And I just think that it was a matter of a rushed situation, not to mention I also have concerns about the constitutionality of it. So, it'll be interesting to see if the Senate tries to take it up. People always joke about how old the Senate is. I don't know if the Senate really wants to try to delve into this space right now.
I'm super appreciative of members of Congress coming on the program. Nick, you and I, we know this, but the audience may not know this. We have a few more coming up in the second half of the year, some that have reached out to this show to come on this show, which that makes me smile right now. You can hear it in my voice, because that means that people know about us. They know that, this is a home for conversation, but also this is a home to, get some good questions asked, framed the correct way, which I've been very critical about the way we frame questions to politicians, to people that we're electing to high office. Like, you have to frame the questions the right way. Don't ask the Captain Obvious or stupid question, like I've mentioned before, like the athlete that gets after winning a championship. How do you feel? No, don't ask that question. Ask intricacies to get a better answer. And it'll make for just a better experience, content, whatever it is. It'll make for something better. And, we frame that question about the bill, and specifically, so many millions of people here in the US use TikTok. They get their news from TikTok, but there's also privacy concerns. But like she said, I couldn't be a yes, I couldn't be a no, because there's other companies that are taking our data. Yeah, they're not working with China, but they got our data and they can do whatever they want with it. So how come we're not going after them with the same rigor, right? One thing I wanted to pivot to, because it gets me thinking about, I mentioned members of Congress coming on this show, but then there's people that are running for office in different districts. And one that kind of came on here had me thinking about what it is that I'm doing, that you and I are doing, not only with this show, but me in the punditry world as well, which was John Avlon, who used to be at CNN as a senior political analyst. And now he's running for Congress up in New York's first district. He recently won the Democratic primary up there this past June to become, the Democrat nominee in that district. So he'll go against a Republican challenger in November. And John and I had met, at CNN. We had done a panel together once. We hit it off. We have some mutual friends. And once he announced that he was running for Congress, we were like, hey, we'd love to have you on the show. And the first question I asked him was something that was kind of sitting with me, because it kind of came out of left field, him running for office, because as I've started to navigate the punditry world, you kind of know who's leaving. And as I'm trying to crack it, who can be coming in. So who would be not so much competition, but can I get in there, right? Is this person's leaving? Hey, that means there's an opening, right? Grand opening, grand closing. So I reached out to John, and he came on, and I said, John, and the question may play a little bit here, but I said, John, what made you leave it? Because it's not so much that it's a cushy job, it's that you have a built-in audience, right? Not only from your social media following, but he had a spot weekly that was called Reality Check, where he could kind of break down what was happening about a specific topic. And he gets 3 minutes, 4 minutes, graphics, etc., to talk about it in depth. His wife has a show on PBS. Like, he writes a column. Like, he has the ability to influence people, or at least get information out there, the way he wants to get it out there. When you leave all of that in the talking about the problem part of it, and you go to the solving of the problem part of it, that's a harder job, right? And it kind of makes you reevaluate, are we doing enough, right? Which is what I asked him. Why did you leave the television punditry world, where you could make a dent and an impact like you were doing, and why run for Congress in New York?
Because I didn't think it was doing enough. And look, I get the joke, man, right? I mean, everyone in Congress seems like they want to be on TV. We got to do nothing Congress, and they say they'd rather be on TV. And so people aren't used to people leaving TV to enter public service. But that's just what I felt the times called for in my own life. I didn't think that offering opinions on cable news panels was enough. I've loved being a journalist for 20 years. I've been editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, written thousands of columns at my Reality Check segment on CNN, did the morning show almost every day for close to 10 years. And I love my former colleagues at CNN. But this, I think, is one of those elections where a nation's on a knife edge. And if we get this right, we'll be fine. If we get this wrong, God help us. And I didn't want to look at my kids and say I could have done more when it mattered most.
I appreciate that call to action that John talked about. And funny enough, John is in a district that I previously lived in Long Island. I think one of the things that John reminds me of, and I'm a Democrat. And hear me out for a second. John represents, as we had with Representative Seth Moulton, we've seen this with Democratic strategists, just a moderate pursuit of trying to not so much focus on politics as about providing a sense of normalcy and progressive focus toward a future through elected office. Oftentimes with Democrats, and we had one on this show a couple times who lost, and we can all argue about what caused Jamal Bowman to lose that primary, but it is what it is. There are some people who just try to make it a show, and it's on both sides of the aisle. John strikes me as one of those folks that really wants to get into this because there's an opportunity to use the office for what it should be as a member of Congress, which is to do good, to do right by your district, to not use as a platform to immediately propel yourself to a national stage, an even larger stage. That's my hope. And when we've had folks on like him, Representative Seth Moulton, we've had people who talk about their district, who are passionate about the work at the local level. And I was excited about that with John, and it was I talked about Representative Crockett earlier, right? Same thing, strong voices that are looking at a progressive future, that are not giving space to the far fringe of the Democratic side that is not going to be where we need to be in order to be a viable political party.
Well said there. We leave it there. Again, folks, we're going to have an incredible, well, maybe not an incredible, who knows, end of 2024. We're going to find out everything that's going to happen this year in the U.S. here with the election process. But we're going to be bringing you some more interviews, some more stories, covering a lot of the things that are playing out in the world of news and politics, and also other stories that are out there that are not being talked about. We're going to bring you some of those in 2024. Our thank yous to all of the guests that have appeared on this show. And like I always say on this show, we can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program. Please follow us across social media, IG, TikTok, at Can We Please Talk Podcast, on Twitter at Can We Please Talk. Head over to our YouTube channel, type in Can We Please Talk Podcast. We should pop right up, and hit the follow or subscribe button while you're there for me. Thank you, as always, to everyone for listening and tuning in. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
Super grateful for the listeners, whether you agree with us or not, whether you want to troll or celebrate us online. All engagement is obviously appreciated. Enjoy your summers, because I think it's about to get even more interesting the rest of this year. I'm Nick Saveri.
We'll see everybody next time.